Ndidi Okonkwo Nwuneli is a renowned social entrepreneur, author, and international development expert with over 25 years of experience driving sustainable solutions across Africa's food systems, entrepreneurial landscape, and leadership space. She currently serves as the president and CEO of the One Campaign, a global advocacy organization focused on ending extreme poverty and preventable diseases, particularly in Africa. Ndidi is the founder of Leap Africa, a youth-focused non-profit that equips the next generation of African leaders with the tools for ethical leadership and nation building. She also founded African Food Changemakers, a platform that supports agribusiness entrepreneurs across the continent. In addition, she co-founded Sahel Consulting Agriculture and Nutrition Limited, a strategy and management consulting firm, and AACE Foods, a social enterprise promoting nutrition and sourcing from smallholder farmers. She holds a bachelor's degree in multinational and strategic management from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, graduating at the age of 20, and an MBA from Harvard Business School, earned at the age of 24. Ndidi is the author of Social Innovation in Africa, Food Entrepreneurs in Africa, and Working for God in the Marketplace. She is a TED speaker, a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, a Schwab Foundation Social Innovation Fellow, and a recipient of Nigeria's National Honor. She serves on numerous boards globally, including the Rockefeller Foundation, AGRA, Stanbic IBTC Group, Nigerian Breweries PLC, Heineken, Godrej Consumer Products Limited, India, the One Campaign, and the Bridgespan Group. Ndidi's work sits at the intersection of social innovation, agriculture and nutrition, youth development, and impact investing, and she is passionate about building ecosystems that foster dignity, prosperity, and equity across Africa. Apostles in the Marketplace, with Jesus joy in your heart, make welcome Ndidi Okonkwo Nwuneli.
And good morning, everyone. I'm calling in from DC, so this is my first conversation this morning, so excuse my voice. And I'm recovering from a cold, but it's an honor to be here. Hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you, Ruby. Thank you to the IMP family. Thank you to all my friends and sisters and brothers in Christ on the call. AIMP has been an important part of my life, and one that I'm very, very passionate about and care deeply about. Some of you know that I used to be quite involved in AIMP, and it's been really an asset for me as someone who cares deeply about working for God in the marketplace. And many times as an entrepreneur, when I wanted to give up, AIMP prayed for me, stood by me, gave me wise counsel, and a special shout out to Pastor John and the leadership team of AIMP. I don't have a presentation this morning. I'll prefer to talk, but I would like to just get a sense for how much time I have for the keynote before we open it up for questions. I would talk about sustainability from a number of lenses. Some of you have come here, okay, 15 minutes, come here to learn about sustainability in the way that we're defining it today, ESG. Some have come to learn about sustainability from the lens of building companies that outlive you. So I'm going to take both lenses, if that's okay with you, and just share some very practical experiences. So let's start with building a company that outlives you. I first decided to get involved in this succession mindset because in 1997, I was a student at Harvard Business School. One of my first days on campus, I went to my cubby hole, which is where you get your mail, and I saw a magazine in 100 Indian companies over 100 years old. And it stuck with me. I kept on thinking 100 Indian companies. India is just one country, and it's an emerging economy, just like Nigeria. I wonder how many Nigerian companies are over 50 years old, not to talk about 100 years old. And that stuck with me. That made me focus on entrepreneurship in school and made me want to learn how to build companies that will outlive me. The first opportunity I had to work with entrepreneurs was actually as a summer intern when I worked with Ford Foundation in Nigeria. And it was interesting because I was working with microfinance organizations. And the first thing I realized for many of the women was that they were actually not even charging their own rates for how much they should earn. And that's the first problem. their businesses were not going concerts. And it struck me and it stayed with me. And so when I came back to Nigeria to help start the Faith Foundation, and then eventually Leap Africa, this issue of, are we building companies that have the building blocks to be successful beyond our lifetime? When 1 out of every 5 companies in Nigeria dies in its first 5 years of operation. So if you are on this call and your company is over 5 years old, you're already doing something right. But the second question is, will this company outlive you? And so when we started Leap Africa, we started looking to see if we could find 10, 15, 20 companies that had outlived their founders. We found very few. We actually wrote a book on this topic. Our first book was called Defying the Odds, Case Studies of Nigerian Companies That Have Survived Generations. I don't know how many of you have copies of that book, but if you don't, I recommend that you find it. And it actually profiles 7 organizations. And which were those organizations? Punch newspapers. And you might say Punch is new. It was started in the 70s. But guess what? Punch has gone through about 5 CEOs and founders. And some of them, with the family that started Punch, unfortunately had a few very sudden deaths and had to really pivot quickly. So Punch is an example. And while we say, well, how many media companies in Nigeria that started in the 70s are still existing today? Very few. Punch is probably one of the very few. Most of them died. We have El Khalil and Family, which is 7-Up Bottling Company, another excellent example of a company that was born in Nigeria and has survived a few generations. And the story of El Khalil is that the founder came to Nigeria with just the shirt on his back. He was actually a Lebanese living in Mexico, had a hard time in Mexico, was on his way back to Lebanon, and then stopped in a shipping village in France where the ship sailed. And somebody said to him, there's money falling off the trees in Nigeria. Come to Nigeria. And he came with the shirt on his back. And today they're in the 4th generation, building the largest bottling companies across Africa, starting in Nigeria. There was also Fegno Group, FG and Okoye and Sons. And some of you who are from the East heard about FG and Okoye, very, very successful family that, had many, many investments in construction. And now we're in the 3rd generation. We also had Orazalike Trading, and some of you know Nneto Orazalike, and he shared the story of his father who started Orazalike Trading. And then we have Corona Schools, and I know that Ruby is a proud Corona alum, and so is probably Pam. And Corona was started by 7 women in the 60s and has survived generations. Now has a Corona Trust, a schools trust with about 5 schools across Lagos, and continues to produce some of the best and brightest. We also have a few but you have to have systems and structures and a strong board of directors, either made of family or non-family members, but a difference between family and non-family. And so this really inspired me and had led me to say, I want to do the same. I want to build companies that will outlive me, learning from the mistakes of others, learning from the successes of others, and then deepening my knowledge. And since then, as the introduction said, I've started and grown businesses that have outlived me, nonprofits and for-profits. And what have I learned from this experience? Number 1, non-negotiable, you have to have a strong board. Leap Africa has succeeded me. I'm not on the board of Leap Africa. I don't know anything that's happening in Leap Africa. People write me saying, what is happening in Leap Africa? No, I don't know. Leap is now 23 years old. It continues to thrive without me as the founder. And I wanted to show that it's possible to do it even in a nonprofit context, having a strong board that renews and refreshes itself. And Shego Lujobi was our first chairman. He was also the chairman of AIMP at LEAP. After that, we passed on to Fabian Ajogu, then Sodenloye, then the list goes on, Mrs. Ayeni. And why am I mentioning these names? These are individuals who are not related to me. These are individuals I met through the divine favor and grace of God, but God led them. And I prayerfully selected them to serve on the board and to serve as chair at a time when we needed support. And many of us take it for granted. And I've counseled many of you on this call in the importance of saying, who are trusted individuals who share my vision and passion, who I can bring into my space because they are going where I'm going, who I'm going to respect their time, their way I engage with them, provide regular updates to them, have regular board meetings that are professionally run, so that if something happens to me, this organization survives and thrives. And you'll notice that I haven't had any family member in any of the organizations I've started as nonprofits. For the for-profits where I've co-founded with my husband, obviously both of us have sat on the board, and in only one exception, Ace Foods, do I have my sister on the board, but she's a regular member who came in because she has the skills and tools to play that role. And oftentimes we want to put our parents, our children, our spouses, because we feel we can trust them. But the challenge is that many people won't take you seriously, outsiders, if they think it's a family affair. And also, you cannot hold each other as accountable as you could if it was a non-family member. So governance is key. And we've written books on governance. I'm not going to dwell on this issue, but I think we take it too lightly in Nigeria. Constitute a board that is made up of experts, subject matter experts, credible people, people who share your values, people who want you to succeed. You should have a lawyer who is not your paid lawyer, a finance expert who is not your paid accountant, someone who understands the industry that you're working in. I call them a subject matter expert, a communications, branding, or marketing person, and an HR person. Rotate them, write a formal letter to them that says you can serve for 3 years, renewable for a second term, or three-year terms, renewable based on attendance, based on performance, etc. And for Ace Foods, Leap Africa, we say we will not pay you for the first X number of years, but you take their time seriously, you give them gifts, etc. Formalize it, document it, and all of that is contained in the book we wrote at Leap called Get On Board. So governance is non-negotiable. I'm serving right now at one campaign. One was started by 3 co-founders. One of them is still on the, 2 of them are still on the board. One is not. The main famous co-founder, Bono, who is an Irish musician, is not on the board. And he made a conscious decision to step off the board in his lifetime so that he could know that this organization would outlive them and should not revolve around him. And that was the same with Leap. My decision to step off the board over 2 years ago was linked to the fact that it should not revolve around me. It's bigger than me. God has used me as a vessel to set it up, but my desire is that it grows. I think about Guttridge, one of the companies you saw that I served on the board. I'm no longer on the board because with this one campaign job, I had to resign from like 5 boards. Guttridge is over 120 years old. It's one of the most remarkable companies that I have ever been privileged to serve on the board. It started as a company that was making trunks. I don't know if you guys remember those tin trunks that our grandmothers used to have that would have their lace and their material. That's how they started. And today they're a diversified family group company traded on the many stock exchanges. And they compete with Unilever in hair care. Darling is their brand. Soaps, in home insecticides, they're all over the world. They're a global company. And their values, their vision, their ethos is still grounded in the founder's mission. And this company has a family trust where they have land in Mumbai that's 3 times the size of Central Park as a trust. Nobody can touch that land, and it's like a forest. That is the vision of the founders and how he passed it on to his generations. And today, the company I served on, JCPL, which is the consumer goods part of the business, is run by the 4th generation, who is the chair. And she's a woman chair, the first female chair. And it's just a beautiful thing to behold. And they have half of the board members who are family members, meaning uncles, cousins, and the other half who are experts from across the world. And I was the first non-Indian to join that board, but it was a great learning experience. So governance, values and vision. Beyond that, it's about systems and structures. And Ruby said, Dr. Ndidi, and I said, amen, because some of you know that I'm working on my PhD. And one of the things that have struck me and are inspired by Ruby, Dr. Ruby, who did have PhD and convinced all of us that you can do it all. It's really important to have systems and structures about how you organize your business, what ownership you have. And this is another big thing. If you take anything away from my conversation, the importance of governance, the second is systems and structures. What is the difference between ownership and management? You can own 100%. You don't have to manage. Many of us are terrible managers. We don't care about details. We don't want to get into the details, but we have to put in place systems and structures. With Sahel Consulting, where I served as managing partner for many, many years, then became chair, then became executive chair, then stepped off. What I was doing was gradually handing the systems and structures to the next generation, putting in place partnership structures, putting in place ownership structures, making sure that those who are coming after me have equity, making sure they have a voice, making sure that they have a seat at the table, making sure that they are compensated for the work they're bringing in. Nobody will stay and build your business for you if they do not feel seen, if they do not feel heard, if they do not have decision-making power, and if they do not have a share of the profits. This is so important. When I think about my successor at Sahel Consulting, Temi Adegoroye, he came in as an analyst and gradually rose up. The reason he stayed is because he sees himself as part of the business, not systems and structures, including the decision to pay for his MBA at Lagos Business School. The same with Mosula Ayode, who was my successor at Leap Africa. We put in place a program that if you have gotten to a certain level in the organization, we will pay for your masters, right? That is a system and structure from an HR perspective to sustain the most competent and credible. Today, Sahel has paid for quite a few of our very outstanding employees to get their MBA at Lagos Business School or at INSEAD or wherever they've chosen to. Yes, sir. We've also ensured that they get equity stakes at Ace Foods, at Sahel. It's really important. We've quantified our own equity, our sweat equity, our salaries. We have offer letters to ourselves so that we know how much we're supposed to earn and how much with sweat equity. We've documented this in terms of who can approve financial transactions, who can make decisions, who cannot, etc. Many of us take it for granted. Document. Treat yourself as a part of the documentation process. Take yourself seriously. Separate your business and your financials and ownership structures from the management structures. Systems and structures pay off all the time. No serious investor, no serious grant maker, no other partner will work with you if you don't have clear systems and structures. Annual audits that are clearly embedded in the principles of the organizations are part of this. So have clear systems and structures. And then the third piece, remember I've talked about governance, systems and structures. And the third is really around the culture of transparency and accountability. Some of you know that I've been working on my dissertation, which is on intuitive judgment. And realized through this is that the culture of your organization matters. And I've come up with archetypes which have been through the research that there are three types of businesses we have in Nigeria. One is the one man, one woman show. And this is where the Oga, Madam, makes all the decisions. How many of you are one man, one woman? Admit it. Meaning you're traveling somewhere, they're still writing you saying, what should we do? What should we do? That's because you have built a culture of dependency and of relative non-transparency, where people can't make decisions without writing you, without asking you, because they're afraid of the consequences of not making the right decision. That type of culture where mistakes are not allowed, where there's a culture of fear, where there are no clear, transparent steps, where there are limited systems and structures, where there's a lack of ownership is unacceptable. It will die with its founder. The second archetype is called chameleon. And you're hearing it for the first time when the book comes out after the dissertation is approved. The chameleon, many of us are chameleons, and I used to be a chameleon. Depending on the person, depending on the circumstance, you're a different person. For some of the chameleons, when I interviewed two people in the same company, they had wildly different experiences. And guess what? Many women entrepreneurs are chameleons. It's not their fault. We've had to adapt. And that those type of companies, while they might look like they're surviving, if something happens radically, the companies don't survive. And then the third, which all of us should aspire to be, are elephants. Their staff and their senior leadership and their CEO speaks from the same strong songbook. Everything is transparent and accountable. Mistakes are allowed. There's no culture of fear. There's a culture of trust. It's built even for younger organizations with radical conversations, open discussions, lots of mentoring and coaching, and willingness to admit where people are failing. People thrive, but there are very few elephants in Nigeria, very few. Most companies, 90% are one woman, one man shows. And we should not have that in the body of Christ because we are supposed to come with a different lens of servant leadership, a different lens of openness and trust, a different lens of collaboration. And so it's really, really important that you think about these and you engage in these. Now that's really around building companies that will survive you. And I'm sure we'll get into more in the Q&A. The other part of sustainability, which I wanted to share, which some of you, when you think about sustainability, think about the ESG lens, which is one that we're starting to spend more time thinking about in most organizations, where you're not just looking at your internal organization, but you're also thinking about your footprints, your carbon footprint. You're also thinking about your economic responsibility, your social responsibility. You're thinking about the expectations of your operations and how you engage as an entity in an environment. And there are many components now, especially if you're in sectors, you're being held to new standards. You know, what is the carbon footprint of your operation? For example, if you have a manufacturing and agriculture organization, what is your CO2 emissions? What's your energy consumption? How are you using water? How are you recycling water? What about waste? What about your sourcing, your supply chain? How are you sourcing sustainably? What about your biodiversity impact? And what about your employee well-being? How do you engage with your community? What about the staff in your organization? What about the neighbors around your company? How are you engaging with them? Are you the type of neighbor that dumps waste everywhere or pushes water out into the gutters in front of your factory? Are you the type of neighbor who's a good neighbor? How are you investing based on what you're tracking? And I'll use a few examples because we do have a manufacturing company called Ace Foods, and I'm a co-founder there, but I'm no longer on the board. And maybe my husband is co-founder as chairman in that organization. Externalities are key. You know, our partners in Sangota matter. I remember when we first moved into the company, we had run service organizations prior to this. And one day we came to try and change the roof because it was an asbestos roof, and area boys surrounded our factory and we're like, what? They said, you can't build or you haven't come to see us. So we had to go and see the Oba, we had to go and see the head of police. We were like, what type of organization? You've registered, you paid your taxes? Yes, we realized that you have to engage in your community. And so now on a regular basis, every Christmas party, we invite our neighbors. The police know us, the Oba knows us. You know, we had to get their permission to operate. We had to get their support. They could limit the success of our organization if we did not engage them. Now, that doesn't mean we pay bribes. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that we understand our stakeholder map, we understand who the critical stakeholders are, and we engage with them regularly. And that's part of ESG as well. Are we employing young people in the community? Absolutely. Do we give back to the community? Absolutely. When we have, Children's Day, there are 2 schools around us. We take our products, we do programs for the children. During COVID, we made sure that all the neighborhoods around us had food. And this is sort of being a good citizen, and that's ESG. The issue of doing no harm, but also doing good is a critical responsibility of every company, and we are being held to those standards, and that's what ESG represents. In the Nigerian context, I'm very proud to sit on the board of Stanbic IBTC Group, and they recently moved into a new building, and it's probably the most ESG compliant, environmentally compliant building in Lagos right now because they met very high standards of carbon emissions. They did a basic review of what they could and could not do, how they manage water, how they manage waste. They also have in that facility a wonderful creche for their staff. They have a wonderful gym, lots of natural lights, etc. So I encourage you to visit the building. But obviously, they had the resources to do it. Many of the SMEs on this call do not. And so the challenge is, what can you do with what you have? Given the requirements, especially for those in certain industries that want to get funding or want to partner or want to be internationally compliant. And it's not just bricks and mortar, even if you're in ICT, you're being held to those standards. And there are funds to enable some of us to transition for those who are, for example, focused using diesel generators and want to move into more sustainable forms of energy. Through the Rockefeller Foundation, we have GAP, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. There's a fund to help you transition. So there are lots of support mechanisms, lots of free trainings, lots of engagement for those who are very committed to becoming more environmentally sustainable, more engaged with their community, and more resilient in terms of how they partner. There are also grants. I mean, ACE has benefited immensely from some small grants to help build out our supply chain with farmers. And funders are willing to support you if you're willing to build out your supply chain as opposed to just buying from middlemen. And so there are lots of opportunities for that. So I would really encourage you to think through those type of commitments depending on your level of engagement. And so I'll round up with just two very, very interesting stories that kind of illustrate the few times we wanted to give up and why we succeeded. And I think they illustrate all the components of what I've described. When we started Ace Foods, and I'll put the link to Ace Foods in the chat, we actually, a few months in, we got a letter from Promasseter. Some of you know Promasseter. Promasseter is another food company in Nigeria, and we had applied for a trademark. I hope all of you have trademarks for your companies. And we had actually gotten approval from the Trademark Commission for our trademark, and the brand of our company was going to be called Honor. And those of you who are Igbo know that Honor means jewel in Igbo. And we were so excited because we had such wonderful branding for our jams, our pepper sauces, and all the products we're going to have with Honor. And then we get a letter from Promasseter. Promasseter says they're suing us because they have a brand called Onga. And I know Amaka sitting on this call has had a similar story to this. And Onga and Honor are two different marks. The colors were different. The names mean different things. I don't know what Onga means, but I know what Honor means. But we quickly, and they were hounding us every single day, calling us from South Africa, where their HQ was, threatening us, and they hired some big-time lawyers. And we were just shocked. We're just getting into the market, trying to survive. So we had an emergency board meeting. That's why you need a board. And we told our board, what should we do? We love our brand, Honor. We had registered a trademark for Ace, but Honor was our brand. Ace was actually a holding company Mazo had created many years ago in America, and it stood for African Center for Economic, what would it stand for? African Alliance for Capital Expansion. And it was just a holding company. But Honor was the brand. And the board said, listen, nobody knows Honor yet. You registered Ace and Honor at the same time. You can spend years fighting Promasseter and money that you don't have. Leave that fight. Let Ace be the name. And that's how Ace became the name. So when people ask us, what does Ace mean? We're like, oh, the Ace means the best of Africa, African Ace. We pivoted and we adapted. And today, Ace is the name. You could have followed what you felt was your right. You could have, I used to tell people in South Africa, what is the difference between boss and busi? Boss, B-U-S, busi, B-U-S-I, Onga, Honor, what is that? Well, we could have spent months fighting, years fighting, legal costs. The only people getting rich are the lawyers. Fighting for what? So we quickly pivoted because our board told us to pivot. We listened to them. If we didn't have a board of experienced people, we would have made some very silly decisions. Today, most of you don't know we had Honor, the most beautiful branding. We spent money and time on this branding, and Ace just became the name. I hope all of you on this line are Ace Foods customers. If you're not, please run and get your best Ace Food spices and products. The second story is really around the decision to step out. When as a founder, when as a co-founder, do you say my time is up? When do you say, you know what, I want to leave and do something else? God is calling me to do something else. When do you do that? When do you know that time? And for me, I've had a few of those moments, and it was quite difficult, right? To come up with the decision to step away from something you love, something you've built. But my biggest advice to you is the day you start your company is the day you should plan your exit in your lifetime. Many of us have heard of people who died and their companies died with them. I don't need to go through the list. Or the company was in complete disarray. Or they died and their family was in complete disarray. That should never be your story. This is your opportunity to say, when is it that I'm going to exit? And what are the things I want to see before I exit? And who will be my successor if I exit? And we always say, oh, we don't want to think about that. Today, who is your successor? Who is your successor? If, for example, God forbid, something happened to you today or something happened to somebody in your family today, who would take this company to the next level? Who would make sure that the sweat and blood and tears that you've put in are not in vain? And for me, that is why you need to separate ownership and management. That is why you need to attract, hire, retain, and keep the best performing people who share your vision. Give them equity, give them ownership, invest in them, give them airtime, give them platforms, make them feel seen and appreciated, and they will stay. Sometimes I'm on planes going to different parts of the world and I run into people who have been or are at companies I've started, and it gives me so much joy. Some of them might be first class and I'm in economy, right? And it's pure joy because God uses you as a vessel to elevate others. So what are you doing there? For me, I knew that I could not be CEO of Leap Africa. Leap Africa is for young people. Am I young anymore? I'm 50, right? For some of us who are running youth organizations and we're 50, please leave the organization for the next generation. I can't even understand the language of this generation. They're my children, right? Why am I blocking the way for them? I knew that God was calling me to something else, and I knew I had to do it in my lifetime. Live with integrity. Leave when you can. Leave when you can be celebrated as opposed to when it's on decline. I visit many of my father's friends, and I'm just like, they're still in their companies, holding on tightly, and they're already in the waiting room, right? Some of them are in their 70s. Know that you can do it in your lifetime. Put in place a strong board, a strong team, and then gradually step away. And you can do what I did with Sahel, move from being managing partner to chair, from being chair to executive chair, and then gradually step off. But that you can do in your lifetime. Know that when you're bored, when you're not as excited, when you're not bringing your A game, when you're distracted mentally and physically, when you're exhausted mentally and physically, you're not bringing your best, it might be time to start thinking about it. But everybody who has a company today should do that with a clarity of purpose and intent. So at this point, I just want to end with two things that have really, really amazed me. Some of you know that when I was a few years into Leap Africa, my husband got shot and we had to move to Senegal. It was a very traumatic experience, but guess what? One of our board members, Dr. Nadu Denloye, stepped in, and as an emergency, she used to come to the organization 3 to 4 days a week for free because she cared so deeply about the vision. And then quickly, we did a succession with Mosula Yode becoming executive director and Ngozi Obigwe becoming the CEO. Those two ladies are still very close friends today and demonstrated what leadership and excellence mean. When I was now starting the Africa Philanthropy Forum, we did a whole search and Mosula Yode was selected to be the executive director of the Africa Philanthropy Forum. I knew from day one, I didn't want to run it, but I helped set it up, put in place a board, put in place a leadership team, and served on the board for 6 years and stepped off. And now I've helped create about 20 organizations. Most of them are still standing today. I've helped run about 6 directly, and all of them are still standing today. It is possible to do it in our lifetime, in our context, in Nigeria, and do it with integrity. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Will you lose sleep? Absolutely yes, but you can do it. Surround yourself with mission-driven high achievers, build a strong governance structure, commit to clear values, vision and mission, commit to clear systems and structures, and commit to being a responsible citizen in your ecosystem, doing no harm to your environment, investing in building strong relationships in the community, and God will bless the works of your hands. One day, we will celebrate over 100 companies in Nigeria that are over 100 years old, and thousands of companies across Africa that are over 100 years old. By God's grace and with your leadership, passion, and vision. God bless you all, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ndidi. That was amazing. I would just like to invite the AIMP Network family to please express yourselves electronically. I see it already coming in. So many notes, so many valuable nuggets and insights. It's a bit overwhelming for me as a co-business owner, but you shared so much value here. Thank you, Ndidi. I'm not even going to attempt to recap, but one of the things I really love that you did was to help us position this issue or matter of sustainability from two different angles, because even when I was thinking about what the discourse today was going to look like, I was wondering if it was going to tilt to one or the other, but you did very well positioning two views. One is on building a business that outlives the founder or the owner, and then looking at the ESG component, which is another conversation around sustainability, which speaks to environment, social and governance, social responsibility and governance. So thank you so much for giving us all of that. So guys, I'm going to ask you, I think I asked earlier, if you could just drop any of your comments, contributions in the chat so that our speaker can attend to some of them before she has to take her leave. I have a few questions that I can start off asking, even though I honestly feel that you've addressed a lot of them, but just for the sake of those who may not have picked it up during your discourse, which again, I think was really beautiful. The stories were really very inspiring. Okay, so the question I have, I think you've addressed the one about what are some of the first steps that leaders in an organization should take when they're trying to become more sustainable. For me, what I heard was the clear vision, mission, the values, important to establish governance framework and structures, systems and structures. You talked about putting together a strong board and the value that already delivered to you. So the question that I will ask is, can you share examples? Because the truth is, like you said, there are big companies that have done this very successfully, and then there are the smaller ones. Which ones would you say, or what are the examples of low cost, but then high impact sustainability practices? So that out of everything that we've heard today, for those who may not be able to afford the bigger things, like, the building that you gave the example of, the Stanbic IBTC has been able to put together. One may be saying, listen, I'm operating out of a very small location. I'm not really sure how I can make that green. But what other low cost but high impact sustainability practices might I be able to bring into my small business?
Yes, thank you so much, Ruby. So I'll use Ace Foods and Sahel as an example. And I'll say that even in some small company as like Sahel, we do a couple of things, and I'll put it in the link. Number one, we have recycling in the office. We stopped using bottles. We just use glasses because we don't want to be contributing to more plastic waste, right? But even when we do have plastic, we have recycling in Sahel Consulting in the office. We also switched the type of snacks we have in our office. And this was a very interesting one. We used to have snacks, all sorts of like goodies for the staff. And then we decided that we're going to be giving fruits, right? So we give fruits to our staff once a day, bananas, oranges, proudly Nigerian fruits mostly, because we really believe that that is a very important component of what we do. We also started a community empowerment program at Sahel, where every year the staff contribute money and then the company matches it 3 times. And then we pick community development initiatives, which the companies vote on, and the staff vote on, and they're so proud to support. And I just put in the link. One is called Project Green, Ways to Fees, Girls in STEM. They pick what they want to support, and we match it 3 times. And it gives them so much joy and so much pride to actually do that. And then we started the Sahel Scholars Program, where we go back to the universities, mostly the universities of our staff, and we basically do introduce people to opportunities in agribusiness. We give scholarships, we give internships, and it's an amazing, amazing program. It builds staff pride. It's a way to engage in the community. It's a way to build a brand name, and it's strategic, meaning it's connected. So I just would really encourage you, do we manage water and waste? And then we use multiple sources of electricity, solar, batteries, minimizing our digital footprint. And then with our farmers, we train them to use sustainable practices and to manage waste. So this is a consulting firm that's doing all of this. And it's a small consulting firm. We have about 60 consultants. Ace Foods, the same. There's recycling. There's minimizing use of plastics. There's water preservation, water recycling in the organization, which is an amazing thing to see. The way we engage with our communities, and all of those are low cost. So I think it's really important where you do have somebody on staff, and if you don't, maybe someone on the HR team or someone in the admin team, to say, what is let's do an audit. How much waste are we generating? How are we engaging with our community? How are we managing water? How are we managing energy? Because they're cost savings to you, but they're also savings to your team, and it increases staff pride, staff loyalty, and engagement. So really would encourage you to check out, I've put a few of the links in the chat so you can see how in the case of Sahel, we engage with the community. We also have principles, even around gender, principles around how we, manage our role in community mapping of our community stakeholders. And many of you say, oh, I'm a service company, why do I care? You should, it matters. It matters because you are an agent of change, a positive agent of change. Some of you know, and I'll put in this, I was actually looking for it before. Some of you know a lot about kind of the faith-driven investor, faith-driven entrepreneur movement. But this concept of like the rules of life, the book of life, and how one of the things you do as entrepreneurs is to bless people, right? Anyway, I'll put the book in the chat.
All right, thank you.
Those are some ideas.
I think, yeah, no, those are a lot of ideas. and I think that I like that there's a range of different things that people can start doing immediately. So you don't have to be making a lot of money to do some of these things. Some are even driven by necessity. When you talked about having multiple sources of power or energy, I know in Nigeria, that's almost a necessity for business to survive. So I think that's an easy one that people might be able to do, even though it can be a bit prohibitive cost-wise. But like I said, you've given us a large range of things that we can select from. And one thing that when you were talking, though, it suggests to me that management really needs to be intentional about doing this. It's not something that just kind of happens on its own. You have to be committed to saying that we want to do this. And so that's one thing that I think is important for the business owners and founders that are on this call to know that it's really about them taking that decision after hearing what they've heard today. The second thing that occurs to me is that this is also a way of bringing awareness even to our staff, our employees, our team members. A lot of them may not even understand the value of some of this. And so it presents an opportunity for the organization to also help them to become more aware of how not only the company is contributing to sustainability, but how they are part of it. And there's an interconnectedness there. So I think it's awesome. I remember in our company, when we were talking about some of our practices, especially doing business in our environment, which can be very difficult, they didn't understand why. And it's taken some time to build that culture and to bring them to a point of understanding. And I can tell you, it's very heartwarming when a new person joins the organization. They're expressing the same, why do you guys do this? Why does it matter? And it's a staff member, a fellow employee, a colleague that is explaining it to them. You know that something has clicked. So I think the second part of what I'm taking away from what you do, of what you've talked about, is that it also presents opportunity for us to change the hearts and minds of the people that we're working with, drawing their awareness to the importance of some of these practices that we're doing. So thanks for that. The other thing I wanted to ask is, so for companies that are engaging in sustainable practices, is there a way for them to measure or to track their progress? Is there some kind of KPI that you've
Yes,
come across?
definitely.
Okay.
But before that, I had put something in the chat which I want to draw everybody to, because they're actually starting in Africa now. It's called Praxis. I've told many of you about Praxis. I love Praxis so much. And if you click on the Praxis framework, the redemptive entrepreneurship framework, I really would love for us to do a session with Praxis actually for AMP, maybe one of the upcoming months. It has different components in the frame. Maybe I don't know if you guys can allow me to share the screen, if some people can see it, but I'll see if I can share the screen.
Yeah, I think if you
It
have
has,
you should be able to. Yeah,
can
we
you
see your
guys see
screen
this
coming up.
website? It has a redemptive frame where, as a Christian business owner, you're called to be redemptive in how you run your company, not exploitative, right? They say the exploitative way is to take all you can get, to gain any advantage, to prevail, to possess. Take all you can get. I win, you lose, win, and control. The ethical way, which is what the world teaches us, is to do things right. I win, you win, be good, do good. But they say the redemptive way is to ensure restoration through sacrifice, to bless others, renew culture, and give of ourselves. I sacrifice, we win. Creative restoration through sacrifice. It is just an amazing mindset. And I would encourage you to read through this link, but also I would really love to see if we can get Praxis and Jeff, who runs Praxis Africa now, to come on this show, because he's built entrepreneurs all over the continent through an organization he created called Partners in Food Solutions, and now he's joined Praxis. And I just think it's just a mindset shift. What is your role as an entrepreneur? What is your role? To reflect Christ, to bless people, to sacrifice. And through that, God blesses you and blesses your business. And if you have that lens, it becomes a guiding principle for the KPIs that I'm going to share. But Ruby, it has to pervade your culture. Otherwise, it's KPIs that you're just ticking boxes, which many of us know how to do, and even falsifying numbers sometimes, right? Versus saying we're going to actually do it as a way of life. So I'm using a few KPIs from the ESG lens, but one KPI from the sustainability lens, meaning succession lens, is number one. It's a very simple question. What is your end date for your own involvement in the company? That's your first KPI today. Write the date, the year, and the month. And number two, are the three people who will succeed you? And if you don't have them, what is the plan for doing that? So that if something happens, number one person, number two person, number three, and what are the steps you're going to take to groom those people or to have confidence that they can succeed you? For the ESG lens, which is the traditional sustainability, what people look at is carbon footprints. And to be able to understand your carbon footprint, you're going to have to do an audit of how much you currently do. And there are actually consultants now who are trained to do that. Energy consumption, and I think that's very easy. We can even look at what our diesel bill is as one KPI and say that today our diesel bill is X, today whatever. Even ICT companies today, if you go on Salesforce website, they can tell you their carbon footprint. Amazon, what their carbon footprint is and what their goal is to reduce it, right? By a certain year or a certain date. How much water we use. And for some of us who pay for water bills, we can tell, like, do you need to have your water running all the time? Can they be water recycled in your organization? How you manage waste, reuse, refill, recycle. And even in ICT companies like yours, Ruby, what is the process for recycling computer waste, in Nigeria? I've always wondered, if I wanted to throw away a computer, where's the waste recycling? Who manages it, right? What about your supply chain? And what is the carbon footprint on that supply chain? How much waste is there? What about your employee well-being, satisfaction, safety, diversity? Have you tracked that? Do you have an annual employee satisfaction survey, a biannual one? What about your community engagement? Do they know you in your community? What matrix are you going to use for that? Costs and around sustainability products. So lots of very useful tools. I'm happy to share some afterwards, but I've just kind of listed a few. Many of us do not have employee satisfaction surveys. We don't. And if I asked on this chat, what was the last time you did an employee satisfaction survey? How much ownership they feel, how engaged they feel, you will be amazed. Oh, I'm happy to hear there's an e-recycling platform. Very exciting.
Yeah, that's pretty
Thank
cool.
you for sharing,
E-waste recycling, umpire.com. Okay. Thank you, Ndidi. So I see we have a number of questions in the chat, so we'll just try to take a few of them. Let's see. So Daniel is asking, okay, our first question, it says, if peradventure a founder has missed some of these steps shared and it's affecting the company's sustainability, what can be done to quickly rescue the situation? I think the responses to the last few questions have actually addressed that. They just need to start. I think one of the things that we like to take out of AIMP Speaker Series is that when you hear something that is of value, it's not just in the hearing, it's in the doing. So a lot has been shared already today. I think that leadership, management, those who are sitting on the call today need to just take the decision to act and then pick out of the things that you've heard, which places that you're going to start. Where are you going to start the journey from in your company, right? So many practical tips have been shared around that. Daniel has a question. He says, when do you know it's the right time to leave, aside age, especially when you've gotten attached to the vision so much that you feel it's tied to your purpose? I know you mentioned a few things, but you said like when you're tired, when you're exhausted mentally and physically, but are there any other indicators?
The interest is where God has to direct your path. And oftentimes God can give us something new if we're holding on to what he has given us so tightly. And the truth is, if you don't plan your succession in your lifetime, what happens when you're gone? You want to, some people are carried out of the building on the stretcher, right? That should never be any of our stories. In fact, when I see people in their 80s working as hard as they are, I'm like, wow, I never want to be that person. I want to be out giving room to the next generation. But I'll tell you a funny story. When I was starting Leap Africa, I went to the Kennedy School of Government for a course called Leadership on the Line. And one day, actually, it was a very terrible course. I actually did not finish the course. It was like so emotionally charged. The teacher left the room. That's part of what they teach you in the course. And the room went into chaos. He left the room, and different people were trying to now step into the role of the teacher, and other people shut them down. But then this guy burst into tears, and he said, "Oh, he used to be the CEO of the LA Times, and he burst into tears." I was like, "What's going on here? This is too much for me. I come from chaos already. Lagos is too chaotic. Why am I coming to Harvard to pay to be in a chaotic room?" And he said, when I was CEO of LA Times, my phone rang off the hook. Now nobody calls me. Nobody calls me. My identity was tied to that role. My self-worth was tied to that role. And that was a lesson for me. I was quite young and I said, I never want to be in a situation where when I've stepped off from a role, I feel, in fact, there was a friend who was a minister, and when she was from her role, leave her for 2 months. We actually went to visit her and she didn't come down to see us because her identity was minister. Do you understand? So I took those lessons and said, never want my identity linked to anything but being in Christ Jesus, right? Never. Because life is something, right? You can be at the highest highs today and the lowest lows tomorrow. Never. So that made me then lose that attachment to anything. So that if God says to the Ndidi, your time at one campaign is done, I'm very comfortable saying, oh, I know God has something even better in store that he wants me to do. It might not be at this profile, but that is better work that he needs me to do because our time here is limited. And so that's my message to you from a place of humility and faith. Never, never, never feel like we're indispensable. I remember once I asked the question, Kagame, Mugabe, and somebody else were on a panel. I was still a very young, dynamic leader who thought the world was something. And I said to them, I got on stage, it was televised live, and I said, the greatest test of a leader is he leaves behind him in other men, the conviction to go on. What is your succession plan? And Mugabe took the microphone and he said, somebody, one of them, you Museveni, took the microphone and he said, "Oh, I've looked across Uganda and there's nobody who can be as good a president as me, and that's why I'm still here."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Oh my God. Oh, if that is what we think, there's nobody. If you look at your company and you say there's nobody as good as me, you've done something wrong. You
Well,
don't have the right people around
it
the table."
explains the actions though, right? We see that playing out even in their
I know, but
inability to
many of
hand
us think
over.
there's nobody as good as us to run our companies. And we are doing the
Mm,
exact same thing.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
stifling the talent, and the best people are leaving because they don't see that they can be the CEO, or they think we're leaving it for our children. So let's also do the assessment that we need. We can point to Mugabe and people like that, but let's do the assessment in our own organization.
So I think that brings us to the final question I think we can take today, which is talks a little bit about the family influence. It says, given your experience with Guthridge, would you consider sustainable family-run business outliers? Whether that is the case or not, what are some of the ways that family-owned businesses can manage the tension between meritocracy and nepotism?
Excellent question. And I would say that I look at Indian and Italian and Lebanese as an outlier group for how they groom family members. But if you follow what they do, and this is a big lesson for us, they do not bring their children and put them as CEO or ED from day one. They make them work from the ground up, from when they're very young on the factory floor. They learn discipline. Most of them, not all, learn discipline, humility, and values. And then they are tested with little, and then they're tested with much.
Mm.
In our context, this kind of entitlement mentality is very dangerous. Do you understand? Very. And we see this failing over and over again because our children are coming into businesses unprepared for the responsibilities. Our family members, the same. And even with spouses, we're not clearly articulating pros and cons of whether this is the right person, this is right values, this is even with your spouse. I have to credit my husband documenting a lot about the ownership structure because it means that things are tidy, and from beginning. Many women, and I want to mention the women, I learned this once in a church. They said, does the paper say Mr. and Mrs. Nwuneli, or does it say Mr. Mezu and Mrs. Ndidi Okonkwo? They said Mrs. can change. Go and check. And I had to go home and check. Is it Mrs. Ndidi? And in one of the papers, it was just Mrs. So they had to add Ndidi.
Wow.
Don't take it for granted. And if you have a spouse who is very supportive and you can do it together, yeah. But all of us have helped build businesses with our spouses, and many of us are not going to be there having any equity at the end of this. So documentation is key, testing is key, paying our dues is key, discipline is key, and ensure that, in the case of Al Khalil, they had a cousin consortium. They had to have documentation about the relationships between cousins and graceful pruning when you cut people off. It was part of the chapter on the Al Khalil. They have graceful pruning. They're people they've cut off from the business. It doesn't mean that they're not part of the family, but they're clearly documenting what it takes to be cut off. And it's called graceful pruning. There's a term. So just know that there's a lot of support out there for these type of things. And the earlier we start, the better. It can be done, but it's difficult.
Awesome. Graceful pruning, I must say, that's the first. But I love the terminology. That's an attempt to soften the message, but to show that it's sometimes necessary. And if you even think about the example of a garden, if you really want your garden to grow, if you want your plants to do the best, you have to prune. Because that's what gives it the energy to be able to focus the resources on what will help you achieve the outcome that you want, which is a really flourishing garden or flourishing business enterprise. So it makes a lot of sense to me, graceful pruning. And everything else that you mentioned is very important. A lot of times you find that businesses that bring in their family, their children, they bring them in at the top. And so they haven't had an opportunity to really learn the business from the ground up. And that sends a message to the other people that they're working with, which I imagine could be demoralizing. So that's something to learn from them, because we're very guilty of saying, oh, Indians, Lebanese, they run family-owned businesses all the time, but it's in the way that they're doing it, I think, that makes the difference. And so I hope that answered the question on meritocracy versus nepotism. I think it was a really good question. Thank you, Ndidi. Words cannot express, especially for me as someone in the marketplace. And then having had, I'll say, front row seats to watching you do this in real life. The things you've talked about here are not things that you learned through just reading books. These are things that you've done practically, and you can see that coming across. So we just want to say thank you so much